Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking a truly chilling and honestly, completely verified account from a wilderness EMT named Mason. We're looking at a terrifying phenomenon deeply rooted in Navajo tradition, the Skinwalker. But look, we aren't just rehashing internet rumors today. We are breaking down two highly detailed, logically connected case studies straight from Mason's life. One from his childhood and one from his professional career as a search and rescue coordinator. Today we're going to examine the absolutely terrifying mechanics of an entity that doesn't just hunt, it mimics.
Now, to understand everything that happens next, we really have to start with this exact ominous warning. This is what Mason's grandfather told him back in the summer of 1991. Listen to that specific phrasing for a second. Something that doesn't move right. You see, his grandfather wasn't warning him about some obvious monster hiding in the dark. He was warning him about something hiding in plain sight. Something that wears the face of your brother, your mother, your father, but just feels wrong. This rule of observation, as you'll see, is the ultimate key to surviving the encounters we're about to explore.
And that brings us to the entity itself. The grandfather defined the Yeenaaldlooshii, the real Skinwalker. According to his lore, these were once men who wanted powers so badly they learned dark medicine, often committing unimaginable acts, like literally killing a sibling, just to be able to wear skins. But here is the absolutely crucial takeaway. They are drawn to weakness, grief, and fear. They don't just attack you. They wait, they watch, and they learn how to be exactly what you want them to be. Also, you'll just invite them right through your front door.
Case Study 1. The Dog That Returned, Window Rock, Arizona, 1991. So let's see how this actually builds. It's 1991, and 10-year-old Mason and his younger brother Kent are staying with their grandparents. Right after that terrifying conversation with his grandfather, they start experiencing some truly bizarre late-night phenomena. We're talking heavy, wet breathing at the window screen, deep claw marks gouged into the metal frame, footsteps up on the roof that are way too heavy for any normal animal. The grandfather burns sage, puts up protection bundles, and it seemingly works, until Mason goes back home and his beloved dog, Checkers, suddenly vanishes into the night.
Let's map out exactly how a trap like this is set. Think about the natural progression of grief here. On day 1, Checkers gets out of a perfectly secure yard. By day 4, the mother is completely losing hope. By day 10, young Kent has this heartbreaking moment of false hope at a local park, which just completely shatters his spirit. The whole family is literally drowning in sadness and desperation. And remember what the grandfather said? These entities are drawn to grief like a magnet. Then, on day 12, early in the morning, Checkers miraculously appears right on the front porch. But immediately, Mason realizes something is horribly, fundamentally wrong.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the stark contrast. As focused learners, you know we always look for anomalies, right? And Mason noticed them instantly. Think about it. A normal dog missing for 12 days should be dirty, matted, panting, probably unable to sit still. But this imposter Checkers, it was perfectly groomed, like cleaner than when it left. It sat perfectly still, basically like a statue. It wasn't panting at all. In fact, its mouth was clamped completely shut. And most terrifyingly, its eyes weren't catching the morning light like a normal dog's. They were flat, dead black. It was a flawless visual copy for sure, but the underlying mechanics were just entirely wrong.
The second Mason's mother opens the door to let the dog in, the whole illusion just breaks down. First, the creature snaps at her fingers with lightning speed. Then, right as it steps over the threshold, its mouth opens, and it actually speaks Mason's name. And it sounds almost human. Mason's father rushes down, grabs a baseball bat, and chases it out. But as it retreats, it does something horrifying. It stops at the edge of the yard, and it tries to stand up. I don't mean jump up. It tries to physically balance on its hind legs like a human being. It's wobbling, like it's trying to figure out its center of gravity before dropping back down and effortlessly clearing a massive fence. So the grandfather arrives to cleanse the house, and he summarizes the situation perfectly. He confirms the absolute darkest fear. The real Checkers actually died days ago. The entity sitting on that porch, it was wearing the dog's skin. It had been watching the family, learning their names, and essentially practicing how to act like their beloved pet just to get an invitation inside. The grief was the bait, and the mimicking was the strategy. Now, Mason packs this childhood trauma away, but as you'll see, the mechanics of this mimicry don't stop with animals. Case Study 2. The Missing Hiker, Cortez, Colorado, 2006. Fast forward 15 years. Mason is now 26. He's a wilderness EMT and a volunteer search and rescue coordinator. It's October 2006, and he gets called out to the high desert outside Cortez, Colorado. A 32-year-old highly experienced hiker named Joseph Benley has gone missing near Sleeping Ute Mountain. Temperatures have dropped well below freezing, which means Joseph has been exposed to the elements for at least 48 hours. Mason and his team hit the trail, fully expecting a standard rescue or sadly a recovery. Instead, they walk right into a waking nightmare.
It's almost like the environment itself begins aggressively rejecting the search team. Consider this bizarre sequence of clues. Before they even start their trek, locals are reporting mysteriously mutilated livestock. Out on the trail, the team finds perfectly intact, dead ravens placed in deliberate lines. Mason walks through localized, unexplained 10-degree cold spots that just reek of copper and death. A colleague slices her hand open on vegetation that feels as sharp as literal glass. And most unnerving of all, they find human handprints pressed deeply into solid tree bark 7 feet off the ground. Even the team's veteran tracking dog Bear is completely paralyzed by some invisible fear.
Against all odds, they actually find Joseph just sitting on a rock, but Mason, applying his EMT training, realizes pretty quickly that something is fundamentally broken with reality here. After 48 hours of freezing exposure and dehydration, a human being should have an elevated heart rate, severe fatigue, and obvious signs of hypothermia, right? But Joseph's vitals are physically impossible. His heart rate is a perfectly steady, unfluctuating 60 beats per minute. His temperature is exactly 98.6. His clothes are completely clean, and he simply stares, completely unblinking, until Mason literally has to verbally remind him to blink. It was like looking at a photograph of a person rather than the person themselves.
The hike down that mountain becomes an exercise in sheer psychological horror. The trail is brutal, covered in loose dirt and rocks, forcing even the seasoned rescuers to stumble. Joseph, however, he never stumbles. Not once. His feet find perfect placement without him even needing to look down. And when Bear, that terrified tracking dog, starts whining defensively at him, Joseph turns and delivers this absolute spine-chilling quote. He says, "Dogs don't like me. They can tell that I'm not right." He passes it off as a joke, but Mason is deeply, deeply rattled. And this brilliantly illustrates the grandfather's warning all over again. If you see something that doesn't move right, run. Mason is watching the uncanny valley play out in real time. Joseph's breath doesn't fog in the freezing air. His shadow actually seems to physically lag a fraction of a second behind his real movements. When someone calls his name, he turns his head just about 10 degrees further than a human neck comfortably should be able to go. He is totally devoid of the relief or the fear or the exhaustion that any rescued man should have. He's a mechanical copy.
And the horror follows Joseph home. When his wife Emily finally sees him, she flinches, noting that his skin is the wrong temperature. Over the next few weeks, his coworkers catch him staring blankly at his desk for hours at a time. One coworker even catches him intensely studying her personal family photos. When she asks what he's doing, he just flatly replies, "Practicing being normal." At home, he refuses to eat, he doesn't sleep, and he's found standing over his terrified children's beds in the pitch dark. His daughter even claims his eyes reflected light in the dark like a cat's. The house is kept freezing cold with all the windows wide open. Guys, it is the dog on the porch all over again, just in human form.
The tragic twist, November 2008. Sadly, this whole observation phase ends in absolute tragedy. 2 years later, Mason wakes up to breaking news. Joseph Benley's house is totally engulfed in flames. Authorities find Emily and the 2 children inside, but they weren't killed by the fire. They were executed in their sleep, and Joseph is gone. A massive manhunt only turns up bare human footprints leading directly into the freezing wilderness, along with strips of what look like human skin left hanging from tree branches. The official story? A psychotic break. But the actual evidence points to something else entirely, letting the mask drop.
Because this is where we reach the most staggering revelation of all. Look at this impossible timeline. 2004, estimated actual time of death. 2006, the rescue. 2008, the murders. Months after the fire, a search and rescue training team finds heavily scavenged human remains deep in the Sleeping Ute Mountain area, the exact same area Joseph originally went missing. Dental and DNA records confirm it is absolutely Joseph Benley. But the medical examiner confirms, based on bone weathering, that these remains have been there for years. The real Joseph Benley actually died on that mountain back in 2004, long before the rescue team ever even found him in 2006.
Which leaves us with this final, impossible question. If the real Joseph died of exposure on that mountain years before the search team even arrived, what exactly did Mason's team rescue? What sat in that hospital flawlessly mimicking human vitals?
and what lived inside that house, practicing being normal for 2 entire years before finally shedding its skin. Think about that the next time you see something that just doesn't move right. Thank you so much for joining this explainer. Keep your eyes open out there,